Kaci, good morning to you. Let me ask, I've been told you were at an undisclosed location. I see Fort Kent, Maine. Where are you exactly?
I am back at my house in Fort Kent, Maine now.
Have you been there since you returned home to Maine on Monday?
I have not. I was in a different location for one night. It was going to be a very long drive. I would have arrived home around 3 a.m. in the morning if we had driven all the way. But we came in last night, and I'm happy to be back home.
In the most basic terms, Kaci, have you been adhering to voluntary isolation conditions since you've been back in Maine?
I have. The other location that I was in, I stayed in the house. I didn't have contact with people. Obviously, I've been doing my self-monitoring, and I plan to do the same today in my home in Fort Kent.
How long do you plan to continue that? It's my understanding that your 21-day isolation period would be up on November 10th. Will you stick to these same guidelines until then?
You know, I don't plan on sticking to the guidelines. I remain appalled by these home quarantine policies that have been forced upon me, even though I am in perfectly good health and feeling strong and have been this entire time completely symptom-free. I'm thankful to be out of the tent in Newark, but I found myself in yet another prison, just in a different environment.
Let me read you something that Mary Mayhew has said. She's the Commissioner of Health and Human Services up in Maine. She says, quote, "We're confident that selfless health workers who are brave enough to care for Ebola patients in a foreign country will be willing to take reasonable steps to protect residents of their own country. However, we are willing to pursue legal authority, if necessary, to ensure risk is minimized for Mainers." I guess the debatable term then is reasonable steps. What's reasonable to you?
I completely agree that aid workers coming back from Ebola assignments are willing to take reasonable steps. And organizations like mine, Doctors Without Borders, have for a long time had reasonable steps in process, which is really self-monitoring, taking your temperature twice a day, understanding that if you develop symptoms, you need to be tested, specifically a fever and some of the more general symptoms. And these policies have worked in the past.
We've got 6 states that basically are going along with the guidelines put in place in New York and New Jersey. You have the Joint Chiefs of Staff recommending to the Department of Defense that troops, U.S. troops coming home from Ebola fighting missions in West Africa, be quarantined for 21 days. Why is it so abhorrent to you to put yourself in that very same position?
I truly believe that this policy is not scientifically nor constitutionally just. And so I am not going to sit around and be bullied by politicians and forced to stay in my home when I am not a risk to the American public. We know that if I develop symptoms, I would isolate in my house. I would call the health department and I would arrange to be safely transferred and tested in a facility that was prepared to safely do those things for me.
This all started when you got to New Jersey, though, Kaci. And let me just go back and put this into context. When you arrived at Newark Liberty International Airport and told people you had just been in Sierra Leone and you'd been treating Ebola patients, and they used that thermal scanner on your forehead after a few hours and it registered you at 101. You have to remember that just a couple of days earlier, Dr. Craig Spencer returned from Guinea, where he was treating Ebola patients. He moved freely about the New York area. Then he developed symptoms and was diagnosed with Ebola. Do you understand what that did to the psyche of public officials in what is a metropolis of 9 million people?
Of course, I do understand that it has created a lot of fear, but we still have to make policies based on evidence. And, the issue at Newark Airport is sort of a different issue. I saw complete disorganization. I saw no leadership. And if you're going to put a policy like that in place that, impedes on my civil rights, then you need to have the administrative details worked out before you start detaining me in an airport for no reason.
I'm going to ask Norm this question in a second. Are you prepared to take legal action not only against the state of New Jersey, but now the state of Maine if they decide to enforce this quarantine period?
Is that for me or Norm?
That's for you, and then I'll ask Norm the same thing.
I'm not talking about New Jersey right now, but if the restrictions placed on me by the state of Maine are not lifted by Thursday morning, I will go to court to fight for my freedom.